Hello and welcome back. I'm going to stick to good morning because I happen to think you shouldn't say good afternoon until after lunch, and on days when the House of Commons doesn't sit until 2:30, it doesn't become good afternoon in the House of Commons until after we sit at 2:30. Anyway, good morning, and thank you for joining me. We've been talking about Boris Johnson's speech at Chatham House, which I think is really interesting and important. I've long been an admirer of Boris Johnson. I think he is an absolutely remarkable politician who has an extraordinary connection to the electorate, that if he is campaigning, people want to cross the road to have a selfie with him or to get his autograph or just to see the Boris phenomenon in action, and that he is a great morale booster at Conservative events. He's enormously popular, and he showed that he could win the mayoral election twice in London, which is usually a Labour city. So there's an extraordinary political talent there. But the criticism that was always made of him, not by me, because I've always thought there was more to it than that, was that that was it, and that he was an entertainer, that he was amusing, that he was charismatic, but was he really a serious statesman? And I think today's speech shows that he's a serious statesman as well, that it deals with some of the trickiest international problems, that the issues with Kim Jong-un, the risk on the Korean peninsula from the North Korean regime, the response of the United States government to it, the reality of the success of the non-proliferation treaty that has kept the number of nuclear states down, has been very important in maintaining global stability since the nuclear weapon was first used in Japan in 1945, against Japan in 1945. And so that's a very important element of it. And then challenging some element of White House policy in regard to Iran, and saying that it is important to have a deal with Iran, that Iran should be in due course welcomed into the normal international community as an important nation with a very interesting history, a very ancient civilization, and that we shouldn't continue to view Iran forever as a pariah state, and that the nuclear deal with them has important beneficial consequences. And then there's this issue of trying to get better relationships between the United Kingdom and Russia. I'm not sure that's going to be easy, and I don't think Boris Johnson's pretending it's going to be easy, because, as he said, the annexation of Crimea was dismaying and remains shocking and is a stumbling block to relations. But he's talking about these really important issues, serious matters, in a statesman-like way, in an arena that wasn't open to jokes and japes. It was really high-level stuff, but it was also high-level stuff that was very well thought through and of a high intellectual calibre. And the question is, what is Boris doing by this? Is he showing himself to have this different plumage from the one that people had seen before with any long-term interests? Or is he doing it because by evolving his reputation, he makes himself a much stronger representative of Brexit in the cabinet, which I happen to think is very important. I think Boris's influence on Brexit as Foreign Secretary is absolutely crucial to us getting the type of Brexit that I and most of the callers we had earlier on today would like to see. So, now, Judy at Brentwood, good morning to you, and what is your view on Boris's speech?
Well, good morning to you. I absolutely think he's done a marvellous job, because I'd love to see him stop behaving like a buffoon, as you say. I agree with everything you say. Such an intelligent man. And honestly, we need to. I have been a Conservative, except for when I voted UKIP, for 52 years. And I wouldn't vote Conservative again. I'm absolutely fed up with the waffle of Theresa May. She has no conviction whatsoever, none. And we know that you do, and we know that Boris does, and we need you.
And do you think that Boris showing himself now is a serious development of his political persona?
Absolutely. If he's decided that he's going to be sensible, then he can be the next Prime Minister. And we need somebody with conviction. We need that, and we need a brain.
Well, he's certainly got a very great brain, but he's tried to keep it under wraps. The Tory party's always been suspicious of too many clever people. The line about being too clever by half is a criticism in the Conservative Party. And Boris is now revealing that he's clever as people always suspected, and I think that's quite important.
Well, I think he'd be a wonderful dinner companion, and I think he's never really, although people have said he's never really had that inclination to be that person that he needs to be. But if he's now decided that the country needs it and that he has that determination, then thank goodness for it.
Well, there's one area I disagree with you. I think we're very lucky to have Theresa May, and I think as a strong statesman-like Foreign Secretary, he will be a great support to her. And I think it's a sign of good leadership to be able to have big characters, big figures within your cabinet. So I think that's more helpful to her, and that will make a stronger government overall, but under her leadership. Thank you very much for calling. I've now got Alex calling from Camden Town, and you're not impressed by the speech, so fire away, please.
Hello, Jacob. No, not abundantly impressed. I think that with Boris, the bar is extremely low for some of the media commentators, so he doesn't have to do very much before they say, by golly, that's a good speech. But the thing is, in reality, all he's done is to reinforce what Trump has already said about North Korea. That doesn't really help us with the North Korea situation, because it's a situation that is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. What
would you say if you were Boris Johnson or President Trump to Kim Jong-un?
What I would say if I was Boris to Trump is, come on, mate, let's ease down on these maneuvers on the peninsula. Let's just roll back a little bit on that, because those particular maneuvers, rehearsing invasions of North Korea, whatever country you are, if there's a superpower rehearsing invading and bombing your country just outside your borders, you're going to get nervous. So I'm not sure that particular approach by the American regime, and it's happened under Obama too, is helpful. It doesn't help with making progress in this area. I'm glad of what he said about the Iran deal. Of course, that's sensible. But the worry is, of course, that part of Boris's reproach is to try and pitch himself as a future Conservative leader. But I just don't think he has the caliber of character that we need for leadership in this country. I don't think he takes people's issues seriously enough.
And what about as Foreign Secretary for Brexit? Do you think he's the right Foreign Secretary for Brexit?
Where do I start with Brexit?
Well, don't start on Brexit itself. Just start on whether you think Boris is the right man for the job.
Well, I don't think Brexit's the right thing for the UK.
Oh, okay. Well, that was the discussion between 10 and 11, so we'd better move on. Thank you so much for calling in. And now, Jonathan in Finchley, good morning. You're worried about the Iran agreement?
Yes, hello, Jacob. I was worried about the Iran agreement when it was signed, because people think that this agreement stops Iran getting nuclear weapons. It does not stop Iran getting nuclear weapons. It is a pathway towards Iran getting nuclear weapons at some time in the future. And we've seen that the Ayatollahs have said 4 times that they want to wipe Israel off the map. Iran is an international sponsor of terror through Hezbollah and Hamas. We know there's no human rights in Iran. They hang gays from trees. We hear some horrible stories. So, what on earth were we doing taking sanctions off Iran in the first place?
Do you think as a counter to that if we hadn't come to an agreement with Iran, it would already have a nuclear bomb in the way that North Korea does, that if we can't stop North Korea getting a bomb, and it's a more backward state, a poorer state than Iran would have been able to get one in the same time frame. And everyone's very surprised about how quick North Korea was in getting a bomb. And therefore it's helpful because it's calmed things down.
No, because sanctions were working on Iran. There were no signs that Iran was on the...
They haven't worked on Korea.
Jacob, there were no signs that Iran was on the threshold of getting a bomb, whereas North Korea has had the bomb, for some time. Iran was a long way behind North Korea in terms of getting nuclear arms. So I was fascinated by what Boris said. I mean, we can talk about Brexit, where my views are entirely contrary to your views, but
we did that earlier. You should have called in between 10 and 11, so we don't want to go back to that. We want to stick on Boris and the speech that he made this morning. But thank you very much for calling in. The question we're asking is, do you think Boris is the right Foreign Secretary for Brexit, and what do you think his speech means for his political ambitions? Do call in, please, on 0345 6060 973. This is LBC with me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, standing in for James O'Brien, and the time is 12:15 precisely. Well, welcome back and good morning. We've been talking about Boris Johnson, but I've got some exciting news for you. In about 20 minutes, we have a very distinguished special caller. He is a Privy Councillor, he is a Knight of the Realm, and he comes from Twickenham. So you can work out who he is. He's a man of great distinction and importance in British political life, and he's going to call in just after the next news. So on the edge of your seats, please, bated breath, waiting for the great man. But in the meantime, we're going to carry on discussing Boris. And George from Coventry, you aren't a great fan.
I'm not. Well, I can't say I can't criticise him too much. He's done a decent job, and I think he should remain as Foreign Secretary. However, I don't think he should run any sort of leadership campaign. I think those supporters of him that were there, particularly the youth, now support you in particular for the job of leader.
Well, I'm not going for any job. I'm backing Mrs May. But you think he's a good or decent Foreign Secretary? You're happy with that? And what do you think of his speech today?
I haven't listened to it yet, actually, so I can't particularly
No, but broadly as Foreign Secretary, you think he's doing a good job and on the right track?
Yeah, and I think he should stay there. I really don't see the point in him running. I think if he were to run and it was left between him and David Davis, Davis would completely overrun him. Well, I don't think there'd be any other opportunity.
I suppose I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think the Tory party is so full of talented cabinet ministers that we're really spoilt for choice. But in the meantime, we've got the best in Mrs May. But thank you very much for calling. We've got a caller from New Zealand, which I'm particularly pleased to welcome. Louis from New Zealand. What time of day is it in New Zealand?
Well, it's almost 12:30.
It's almost half. So you're 12 hours different. So you're staying up late to join us.
Oh yes, of course. I would never think of not joining you, but I'm sorry, Jacob.
Well, that's great. Thank you. So what do you want to say about Boris? How well does he go down in the Antipodes?
Well, he's not that well known, but certainly in Australia, he's a bit better known than New Zealand. Hopefully, when he becomes Prime Minister, surely pretty soon, he will become better known.
Well, I hope Mrs May stays Prime Minister, but no doubt he'd become better known even as Foreign Secretary. And you've just had a new election in New Zealand and got a new Prime Minister.
Oh, yes, Jacinda Ardern.
Not that I should allow the conversation to wander too much, but were you pleased by that?
I'm not particularly, but I'm not too concerned with New Zealand politics.
Okay. Do you live in New zealand, or are you just calling from New Zealand currently?
I do live here, yes, but I am originally from South Africa, and I do prefer the foreign political situation regardless. Okay.
Well, it's really good of you to stay up so late. Thank you very much for calling in and for your comments on Boris. It's much appreciated. We're now going to go to Nick in Solihull. Nick, what are your thoughts? Good morning.
Good morning to you. I haven't actually heard Boris's speech, as I've explained to your researcher. But first and foremost, he's covertly making his position clear that he does want to dispose of Mrs May. And I have to say, in all honesty, that for me, she's been the worst Prime Minister this country's ever had. You don't go to a negotiating table with your hand, revealing your hand before you even get the facts and figures from the other side. And she's made so many blunders. We're sort of 18 months down the line, we're no further forward. And I think Boris, with his flamboyancy and his flair and his education, would make an excellent Prime Minister because he doesn't mince his words. It runs circles around junkies. And the other president, former president, the German guy. So for me, I think it's about time we moved on and we've done something really positive.
Do you think it's tone? The thing I find so attractive about Boris's approach to politics is that he's always positive, he's always upbeat, he's always putting his best foot forward, so to speak. And do you think that is helpful in negotiations?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, we've got a European sort of Parliament which is full of stooges, basically, who steadfastly believe in the totalitarian sort of approach to politics. And Boris can dismantle that because he basically tell them where he's actually coming from and where his honesty, which I particularly like, and he represents the ordinary person that voted Conservative. He represents their true conservatism, whereas Mrs May, because she's a Remainer and most of the cabinet are, that is why we're getting such a negative response from the European Parliament, especially Juncker and the chief negotiator. So for me, he would put his cards on the table and say, look, this is the deal, take it or leave it.
And he wrote that brilliant article for the Telegraph, the 4,000-word article, where he explained government policy and said that government policy was a very good thing. And lots of people complained that this was breaking collective responsibility, which seemed very strange when all he was doing was supporting the policy the government was meant to be signed up to.
Well, that's exactly... Yes, that's, this... Well, the people that complained about that, Rees, were the Remainers in the cabinet, and also the backstabbers in the Labour Party. God forbid if that Corbyn ever gets anywhere near number 10, I'd leave the country. So, just to summarise, that I think that Boris, he's definitely making a play for the leadership, and I do think that Theresa May will be replaced within the next 3 or 4 months.
Well, I hope not, but thank you for calling in. I'm now going to go to Glasgow. I'm very pleased we've got a caller from Scotland. Rosie, good morning. What would you like to say?
Good morning, Jacob. I would just like to say that could we put an advert in the paper? There must be a better candidate for the next Prime Minister than Boris Johnson.
Well, I don't think it should be an advert in the papers.
I was watching W1A the other night, and I'd far rather have Hugh Bonneville for Prime Minister rather than Boris Johnson. And I really don't think he is the face that represents the bulk of the UK in any of these negotiations.
Who would you like? Would you like Ruth Davidson? Are you an admirer of hers?
No, I wouldn't particularly like Ruth Davidson either, but she's certainly better than the other options that seem to be on the table at the moment. But no, seriously, Boris, yeah, great. If he was on Britain's Got Talent, I'd probably vote for him, He's got that charisma and he's got the buffoonery, but that's not what we need when we are going to negotiate our exit from the European Union.
But do you think a series of serious speeches like the one he's made today might change your mind? If somebody who likes him, thinks he's an attractive character, but thinks he's not completely serious, if this is the beginning of a new serious Boris, do you think he can maintain his popular appeal and be serious at the same time?
No, I don't think so. I think he's built his reputation on his buffoonery, and in response to the last caller, he certainly stabbed some people in the back when it came to whether he was a Remainer or a Leaver, if we can think back to before even the referendum, and I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him, and that wouldn't be very far.
Well, thank you very much for calling. We've now got Darryl in Lincoln, another caller from Lincoln, which clearly pays close attention. Perhaps LBC stands for the Lincoln Broadcasting Corporation, but Darryl, you want him to remain as Foreign Secretary?
Hi, Jacob. Yes, I do. I'm no Boris fan, I must confess. However, I'm a little bit disappointed listening to your show that we're meant to talk. Hopefully, we're talking about Boris and this major foreign policy speech. And I look around the world. I'm an ex-member of the military. I've got friends and colleagues that are still serving abroad, risking their lives in Syria. We have the Iran deal, which may or may not be good. North Korea, which you highlighted, and Boris actually said in his speech in the Q&A session that military action must remain on the table, and yet we're all talking about Brexit. There's these huge foreign policy problems looming that we need him to totally concentrate on. So I was really pleased at the gravitas of his speech today, but I think he should stick to it. He should leave Brexit to David Davis and everybody else and like really concentrate on that, because we are still a major player in the world, and he needs to be out there with the gravitas that the position of Foreign Secretary should hold.
And you think his speech made a really serious contribution to that today?
But I just think,
and you want him to stick to that?
I do. I think his point, I like the way he played to the Trump agenda insofar as we are supporting his stance against North Korea, which I think is important, but also he was willing to say that the Iran deal should remain on the table, and so we're not completely bending over and doing whatever the Americans want. But again, I think all we will be talking about were the comments at the end about the Florence speech, and it's just going to all go back to Brexit.
Well, thank you very much for calling in. This is LBC with me, Jacob Rees-Mogg. The time is 12:30, and it's... Well, good morning. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. I'm really pleased that we've got Sir Vince Cable, the leader of the Lib Dems, ready to join us. And I'm flattered, Sir Vince, if you're there, that your party got in touch on my first go as an LBC presenter. So thank you very much.
No, and I'm delighted, and congratulations to you on this rather important role.
Thank you. And inevitably, Brexit is the issue that you and I disagree on most. We've been discussing it earlier, and some of what's come out over the weekend. I'm concerned, as I'm sure you'd expect, that if we have a long transition, we don't get the advantages of Brexit in time. But I know you're quite keen on the transition course.
Well, no, actually, I think we may agree with each other for different reasons. I mean, in a way, transition is kicking the can down the road. It doesn't provide an answer to the question, what comes after transition? I can understand why businesses who are very nervous and are currently registering their anxiety about what's happening at the moment, and a lot of them have done that this morning, want some certainty, and they think that by staying within the European Union rules for a couple of years, or 3 or 4, they will get that certainty. But the question arises, which I think you're asking from an opposite point of view, which is what happens after the transition. So it's very much a second best.
And the second referendum issue that you raised at your party conference speech, you're pushing for that now quite strongly.
Well, I'm always very careful to say that we're not talking about a second referendum in the sense of rerunning the last one, and I think maybe that wasn't properly communicated in the past.
Well, what would it do then if it didn't attempt to reverse the last one?
What it would do would be to look at the facts once we have an outcome. At the moment, we have no idea what Brexit will result in. It may result in a fairly radical break, I think, as you would want. It may result in a very modest break, the continuation of a lot of the arrangements of the single market, the customs union. We don't know how much money is going to be paid. We don't know what are going to be the arrangements for nationals. And our view is that when we do know what the outcome is, we should go back to the British public and say, are you happy with this? Is this what you voted for? Or do you want an exit from Brexit? So it's a different set of questions.
But that's not how the treaty works, is it? That under Article 50, at the end of the 2-year period, you leave unless it's extended by qualified majority voting, or there's a deal. If after that point the British people in a referendum rejected the deal, the treaty makes quite clear in Article 50 that you then have to apply for membership from the beginning, and that means adopting the Euro and Schengen, which are things we had opt-outs from as an existing member, but are not offered to new members.
Well, you're right in the sense that if the timing is crucial, and that if we were to go back and consult the British public again, it would be in a fairly narrow window of opportunity before Article 50 expires.
When do you think that opportunity arises? Because the negotiations aren't likely to be finished long before the deadline, and so you'd be proposing that you would have a referendum before March the 29th, 2019, and then if that went against the deal, you'd expect the government to pull the Article 50 notification, which may or may not be allowable under the treaties, that the lawyers don't have a unified view.
That is correct. The advice I've had is that in practice it wouldn't be difficult to stay within the European Union if that is what the British public wanted. I doubt that there would be strong political objections in the rest of the European Union. They'd hate this disruption as many of us in the UK do. But I think where you are right is that if it went beyond the expiry of Article 50, you're then in a much messier situation of having to reapply. I doubt in practice that membership of the Eurozone would be a condition, but of course it would be much more difficult in legal terms.
And is that what you are in favour of? Assuming that we get to March 2019 and leave, you would then want to move to reapplying?
No, I wouldn't want to reapply. I think that would be a very unsatisfactory, messy outcome. I think the way in which the European Union is evolving is not in the direction of one single-speed Europe with everybody belonging to the Eurozone. I think we're potentially in a much more flexible set of arrangements in which Britain is part of an outer tier with some of the Scandinavian countries and Eastern Europeans. That's why I'm worried that we're walking away from Europe at precisely the time when a more flexible set of arrangements is coming into force.
But do you think that because the President of France has said that he wants to see a more integrated Europe, the President of the Commission said in his State of the Union speech that they really needed to go full speed ahead, one of the answers to the problems of the Eurozone is to have a more integrated finance ministry to deal with some of the problems it creates. So the British have often said that the EU is going in its direction if only we stay and we influence it. But isn't there at least quite a bit of evidence that leading figures within the European Union want to go in the opposite direction and aren't offering opt-outs for the Scandinavian countries within this?
Well, there are some spokesmen who do take that view.
But they're quite important ones.
Well, Mr. Juncker certainly takes that view, but you may remember that when he came out with his most recent utterances, it was the Prime Minister of Holland, I think. He said, this is a man with visions, he should go and see an optician. There is a great deal of scepticism in other parts of Europe about this highly integrationist agenda.
President of France with quite a strong mandate.
He is. Certainly he's a very powerful influence. And I think where the logic of this is that clearly if you are a member of the Eurozone, then one way of making it more successful, and of course it has continued. There were a lot of sceptics who said it would fall apart repeatedly in the last few years, and it never did. But one way of consolidating it would be to have greater fiscal coordination and greater banking coordination. The Germans are sceptical about both, but that you could move in that direction. But there's no reason why Britain should be part of that.
Except if we're applying to rejoin from the outside, assuming we get to March 2019 and have left. That is the requirement of the legal status of the European treaties, that they don't have opt-outs for new members.
Well, that is why I'm arguing that if we were to have another consultation with the British public, it should take place before Article 50 expires.
So time's quite running out for that, isn't it?
Well, it's running out for that. It's also running out for the government.
Well, it isn't really, because the government gets to March 2019 and we leave, and that's government policy, and it's putting in place its preparations for leaving without a deal, which also saves us a great deal of money.
That's where I'm afraid where we part company massively. There are clearly senior members of the government, or your government,
Well, Her
who do
Majesty's
not
government, but not mine.
who don't accept that crashing out of the European without a deal is satisfactory, that it could be massively disruptive, because of course we're not just talking about tariffs here, we're talking about, as you know, a high level of integration around standards and regulation, and the potential for disruption is massive. And if that happened, there would be a very substantial fall in the economy and a fall in government revenue receipts.
But all our standards would be the same at the time that we left. I think the cliff edge is much like the millennium bug, that people hugely overstate the risks that are coming from it, and that WTO terms allow for pretty efficient, smooth trading, as we do for 60% of our exports already.
Well, the problem with the World Trade Organization is, I'm sure you've been following this, that the leading member of the World Trade Organization, the United States, no longer recognizes its authority, is refusing to send judges to its panels. Its authority is weakening by the day. And of course, it only covers a very limited range of the products and services which we deal with in Europe. So, I'm a great fan of the World Trade Organization, but its powers are limited and its scope's limited.
Moving slightly, Mr. Juncker, the President of the Commission, has now denied the reports that he was very rude about Mrs. May after the dinner. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't seen that. There is a lot of rather silly chit-chat going on both sides, spin doctors trying to portray these events in different ways. I ignore them.
But it's not a good way to do negotiations,
no, it isn't.
is it?
Of course it isn't. We should be respectful on both sides.
Well, I'm really grateful you called in. We've got to go to the messages, but thank you so much. It's a real honour that the leader of the Lib Dems has called in and talked to us so frankly about the prospects for a second referendum. Thank you, Sir Vince. And now it is Jacob Rees-Mogg. The time is 12:45. This is LBC. Well, thank you and welcome back. I was hoping we'd get in something on the police because of this story about them spending time painting their fingernails, but actually we've got so many calls on Boris that we're going to stick with that. But just to give you some context, the Avon and Somerset Police Force, which is the finest constabulary in the country, it has a fabulous and distinguished record. It covers the area of Somerset I live in, had as far as one can tell, a mental aberration and decided to paint the officers' fingernails to make a pointless point. All it did was make it look as if they weren't spending their money properly when police resources are limited, and we were going to have a discussion on that. But I'm glad I've been able to say instead that Avon and Somerset are a really very good force, and I think we should forgive them one aberration. But back to Boris, we've had lots of tweets coming in, lots of calls, and now we've got one from Josh in Eastleigh, a seat that used to be held by the Lib Dems but is now Conservative. Josh, what's your thought?
Hi there, Jacob. Well, basically, yeah, I think Boris is definitely, through that speech, he's definitely positioning himself for the leadership. I'm sure the Tory party have no illusions as to that. But I think it's great. I think he is absolutely the man to take the Tory leadership, because it's guaranteed that the split in the party that will cause will keep them out of government for probably a nice 10-year 15-year period.
Oh, I see. So that's your cunning plan. Dare I say it's rather Baldrick-esque cunning plan, because Boris is very popular.
Is he? Okay. Well, I think having to say I'm going to table my leadership bid until 2019 is definitely something that a popular person would do. And the fact that you consistently have Tory insiders coming on to various news stations and talking to various newspapers saying if he goes, he's not going to get a single vote, that definitely does inspire confidence.
Well, he could win the mayoralship of London twice in a city that normally votes Labour. He does seem to have a very charismatic touch when it comes to elections.
Okay, so is this you formally declaring for Boris now, Jacob?
I backed almost everybody in the last leadership election, and is something I'm eminently teasable on, but the first person I backed was Boris, so I've held him in high regard for a long time. But I like the roundabout way that you want him to be a high-flying figure in the Tory party, because you think he'd be ruinous for us. Thank you very much for calling. And I'm now going to go to Peter in Ilford. You liked Boris's speech?
Yes, I've actually had the privilege of meeting him, and I rate him as a really nice chap. I'm a bit of a like to tease people, and he can take a joke. And
so, what did you say to him?
Well, with his long hair, I said, his wife doesn't need a mop round the house.
How did he respond to that?
Oh, he took it. I know, he's a really nice guy. He can really take a joke. He's a really decent chap. You know, like I could probably tease you and say, what was your nickname at school? Was it Moggy? Sorry about that.
No, I don't mind at all, but at least you couldn't use my hair as a mop. I don't think it'd be very effective.
No, he's a really nice chap, and as I say, you know, I didn't manage to listen to his speech, but, you know, I think when May goes, and I think she should stay as long as she can, because she's a very intelligent, capable person, and I think she's handled things, very difficult situation, brilliantly, and I think she's a brilliant lady, a brilliant leader, so she doesn't want replacing, but, you know, as I say, when the list comes, I think probably Boris and yourself might be on it, you know, as replacements.
Well, I can't think, but I will be, but I'm so glad you're supporting Mrs. May. I think she's been absolutely terrific.
I think she's brilliant.
And has great courage.
Yes, definitely. I think and the thing about her too, you know, you look at her CV, what great experience she's had. You know, she can call, and also you look on her upbringing and her life. She's a brilliant lady.
Yeah, no, she's very impressive and has enormous integrity and honour.
Yes, I totally agree with you, as I say, and I think the Conservative Party is having a lot of flack at the moment, and you know they're trying to do what the country voted for.
That's right, and governments have to make decisions, and when you make choices, people who would have chosen the other thing don't like it, and that's inevitably the responsibility of governing.
Yes, definitely. I'm you know, right behind it. You know, because my business is psychology, and I like to assess people and things, you know, not just on what the press says, which unfortunately is always negative, and so many stories are false just to sell papers and things. So yes, I really rate the guy, and I haven't met you know, the Prime Minister, but I think she's absolutely super person.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for calling in. I'm now going to go to James at Heathrow, who is not such a Boris fan. James, good morning.
Morning, sir. Yeah, I'm afraid I've got to agree with Mr. Michael Gove that Boris is not the man for the job. I'm afraid it's from the time when he was Mayor of London during the Olympics. The way that he let himself be dangled from a wire to deflect from the ticketing scandal that was going on. That's not a man of integrity, that, in my book. I mean,
why don't you think he's got integrity? I think he's very honest and straightforward about his political beliefs.
I believe Boris is the man that they bring in whenever they need to throw some smoke and mirrors about. It just does not help. I mean, I'm a London taxi driver, and I was at a London City Hall when there was a meeting there, and I watched the way he fired the bullet of Luddite. I watched his beady little eyes when he opened his mouth and said the word Luddite as a disruption. And the way it's just he does not do it for me at all. I think there's nothing about the man at all. He's very charismatic and everybody loves him, but I don't trust him at all.
And that's because of your experience as a cab driver and finding how difficult it was to be a cab driver whilst he was mayor.
He was mayor of London. He had power over TfL, but according to Sunday Times, on the democracy thing, he succumbed to the lobbying of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. He done that on to the betterment of an American company. I've been in where he's been making speeches, and it does not hit with me at all.
Has he ever been in the back of your cab?
No, he's got a certain term for London cab drivers that was used during the newspapers he doesn't like. That's very much so.
I'm a great fan of the London cab driver, so I hope I hire you one day. Thank you very much. I'm going to fit in one more call from Stephen at Bradford, because what do you want to say, sir?
Well, first of all, what a wonderful show, and your reputation has certainly been further enhanced.
Thank you very much.
I think that you are certainly a serious contender when Mrs. May hangs up her boots, as it were.
Well, you're very kind. I didn't know you were going to say this. I thought you were going to say something about Boris, but thank you for your compliments.
I would briefly say you are all of these wonderful things compared to Mr. Boris Johnson. I've been voting Tory for 50 years. I think he's the worst foreign secretary we've ever had. I think he's a buffoon and a circus clown. I don't know how you can rate him so highly, sir.
Okay, I think a bit hard on him. I think he's got a sense of humour, and one of the texts we got in said, "Good morning, re Boris Johnson. A sense of humour is the first sign of intelligence. If you get past the coarse jester, I think we would have a great Prime Minister." That's from
Einstein
Frank in Lancashire.
Said that imagination was the first sign of intelligence. I'd rather agree with Einstein.
Oh, okay, but don't you think humour needs imagination? Or is this getting a bit too philosophical for just before lunchtime?
But once again, I want to repeat my absolute sincere thanks for an excellent show.
Well, thank you so much. Really kind of you to call in. I have got quite a few texts that have been fired across of mixed views. One says, which I like, Boris has something about him. He scares the EU. If his stance about Brexit and peace in the paper was a tool to move them, it worked. He is very clever and memorable. The buffoon tag is an elephant in the room and gets him noticed. I wish Mrs. May would talk up Brexit. And then somebody else who's not so flattering said, Boris is not appropriate as Foreign Secretary. It gets better. He's too straight and honest, rather than diplomatic dilly-dallying. I like that. Dilly-dallying is a good phrase, so thank you to Alex in Norfolk for dilly-dallying. Well, this has been a very enjoyable 3 hours. It's passed quite quickly. I must confess I'm now looking forward to my lunch before going over to the House of Commons, which sits at 2:30 today. You've been listening to me, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Tomorrow at 10, it'll be Chuka Amuna for the 5 Days, 5 Voices. Coming up at 4, it's Ian Dale. Next, the great Sheila Fogarty.
Thank you very much indeed. Is it the afternoon now? Can I say good afternoon to people now? I can. Thank you. Good. Thank you very much.